Hello everyone, and welcome back to Micks Guide to Redstone. This is episode 3. In this series I try to explain Redstone all the way from entry level, all the way up to more complicated stuff. In this episode I want to talk about droppers, dispensers, hoppers, and Redstone comparators. I will start off with the dropper, and what it is and what it does. A dropper basically is a block that you can put items into, and it will dispense those items out. It will drop those items whenever you give it a signal, like so. You can power it on all of its sides, which means there is no place you cannot power this thing. Top, bottom, north, east, south, and west, it all works. A hopper has the feature that it can dispense items into another container, which means basically anything that has inventory space. If you do like so, you can have the items go into this one, and then out of that one. A hopper, a dropper, but a dropper has the ability to be bot powered, I believe. If I could get myself I'll show you. Like so. It is able to be bot powered one block above, just like we learned with pistons. That is basically a dropper. The last thing about a dropper is that if you take different kind of blocks and put into them, I will demonstrate this by doing so. The order in which they drop items is completely random, so it will check for the slots, which one has stuff in it, and it will randomly choose which one it will drop from, which means that in this case there is a 33.3% chance of it being any of these colors when we power it that comes out. Like so. It's completely random, which can be used, which I will show a little bit later. That's it for the dropper. Not much else you need to know about that right now. Then there's the dispenser. The only difference between a dispenser and a dropper is that a dispenser will sometimes do special stuff depending on what item you put in it. A dropper will always drop the item. Always. It's a dropper. It's a dispenser. So I'll give you one example. Actually, I'll give you two. I'll give you the arrow example, and I'll give you the bucket example. Let's use lava. So if I put in some arrow and some lava into the dispenser, I put some arrows and some lava into a dropper, and then power. We'll start off with the dropper. It drops the lava and drops the arrow. But if we go over to the dispenser, it will shoot the arrow, and it will actually dispense out the lava and pick it up again. So that is the only difference in these two items. Other than that, the dispenser also has exactly the same properties as the dropper, as I explained it. Now I'll move on to the hopper, which I accidentally named the dropper right before. The hopper is a container, which means that you can dispense item into it. It also has the ability to pick up items from above, which means that any item that comes in contact with this area will be picked up and stored into the hopper. It has the ability to send items through it, which means that if I put items into this, it will now flow down at a rate of 1 tick per block. If I put them into each other, they will put it into each other, and it will go back and forward. If we make a line, they will transport them in that direction too. I'll show by doing so. And it can face in all directions except up. It can face down, north, south, west and east. Cannot face up. These blocks only transport items in those directions, not up. And you can use a dropper to drop the item into the hopper, which means that when I activate this, the items should... Oh, I know why. Oh, that's kind of weird. Why is that not working? I have no idea. Maybe it has to be a dispenser. It probably is because it has to be a dispenser. No. I'll give you another example then. It's kind of a bad example. There you go. It's because it was flowing back into it, which is my next point. You can lock the hopper by powering it by redstone, which is the last feature we need to talk about the hopper. Is that if you power it, like right now the item is going back and forth, but if you give power to the hopper from any direction, it will lock that hopper, which means items can no longer flow out of that hopper. Right, sorry about that, I was a little bit confused myself too, but that is how that works. Then I want to talk about the comparator, which is gonna be the last thing I will talk about in this tutorial, and then I will do another build along like we did in last episode, where we try to use some of these components to make something I made some time ago. So the comparator is probably the one redstone block that most people have a hard time understanding what it does, because it has a few features, let's put it like that, and people are confused with what these features does. So I will do a detailed explanation on what a comparator does. So I'll give us some playground here. A comparator has a input here and on either of the sides, but you only actually need to worry about one of the sides for now, and it has an output right here. Baseline, what a comparator does in terms of redstone is that it compares the two inputs that it has. So it will compare this line with this line in one way or another. So right now, if I put a block here, what it also is doing is that it outputs whatever is left of what it gets input. So I'll bring off my F3 screen, and you have to look on the far right side, and slightly to the bottom there's an attribute called power, which shows the signal strength, like we learned in episode 1. So right now this redstone dust has a power of 14, which is going into this comparator, which is then outputted as 14 because it sends out whatever is put in. Now if we take another block here, we will see that nothing changes. It's exactly the same. That is because we're now comparing 14 against 14, which this one wins because it has to be able to put a power output out. It has to be this input has to be greater or equal to this input. But if I now swap them around, this one is now 15 against 14, which means that this now has a greater input power, which means that this one outputs nothing. That's the one thing you need to know about the comparator. The other thing is that it has another mode, which is now the subtract mode. And this is where I think a lot of people don't know what a comparator actually can do. In terms of the subtract mode, what it will do is that it will actually subtract signal strength. Now it doesn't compare anymore, it subtracts, which means that if I do 15 minus 15, we get 0. So before, like in the other mode, whoops, this one will go through because this one is greater than or equal to this one. But in subtract mode, it subtracts them from each other, which means that this is now 0. If I move this block one behind, we now have a input of 14 and an input of 15, which is now 15 minus 14, which gives us 1. That is it in all of its glory. It can be a little bit tricky to get your head around the first time you play around with a comparator, because you have to remember that signal strength inputted, the further you go down this line, the lower the input is, not higher, which a lot of people confuse, because redstone dust goes one down each time. Right, and then a comparator has one more feature I want to talk about today, which is that you can get a signal strength based output based on how many items is in a container next to a comparator. So for this you don't need any fancy trickery, you just need it to be a comparator. And you need any kind of inventory interface, which can be anything. It can be all of the items we've shown so far. It can also be a chest, so I'll show a chest. I can't go into like specific numbers, but basically how it works is that the total amount of slots there is in a container, how much is occupied of those total slots in percentage wise is how much it will output. So one block in a chest or one block in anything will always just be 1. And then another thing that people should know is that non-stackable items takes up an entire slot, which means that just one sword will actually give more output than a block, which will be better shown off if I use a inventory with less blocks. So here we're taking up 1 out of 9 slots, which will give us 2 in strength and not 3. But if I use a block, we're only taking up 1/64th of a slot, because blocks can stack to 64. It only gives us 1. You can do that with a lot of stuff. Now I want to show you a little neat thing you can do with all of this. So as we learned, the dropper is randomized in what it will drop, and we can put items into a hopper by powering a dropper, and it's going to be a random one. And as we know, depending on how many items it takes up, it generates a different signal, which means we can make the bulk standard randomizer now. We've learned how to do that. What we will do is that we'll put a stackable item in, and a non-stackable item. And there's a 50-50 chance that it's gonna choose either of these items. But they're gonna generate 2 different signals, basically. Which means that if I grab myself some redstone dust here and put it along, we now have a 50-50% chance of turning on a redstone lamp whenever we activate this contraption. And I will show you so by using a button. Like so. So that's turned on. Turned on. Didn't turn on. Didn't turn on. So redstone dust doesn't turn on, and salt is we turn on. I'll catch it. There you go. And that is how a comparator works, and how a dropper and a dispenser and a hopper works. Now I'll do the final build along now, and see if you can follow along and make something from only items we've learned how it works by so far. And if you can do it, and you can understand what is going on. It might be a little bit complicated, but you should be able to get how most of it works. So we want to start off by putting 2 hoppers into each other, and we want to place a block on either side under them. So like this. That's what you want to start out with. Now on both of these blocks facing outwards from the hoppers, we want to place a comparator going into a block which is raised diagonally 1 block above them. Then redstone dust on each of these. Then you want to have a sticky piston above each comparator facing towards the hoppers, so like this into each other. And then on this side, on the left side, you want to place a redstone block, and above that redstone block you want to place a block, and on the side of that block you want to place a redstone torch. Now that's the first part of the circuit, and we want to place a button here. Now, what does this do? It basically, we need to put items in here. I'll put 3 items in here. The more items that you have into this hopper right here, the longer the redstone block will be on this side. Because what happens is that we remove this block over into the other side, which means that the items can now rush into this hopper, but they have to be fully loaded over into this hopper before the block can go back and allow them to go back, and then the entire circle resets. For all of this time we will have this redstone dust turned on, which I will show you what we need that one for. This is, by the way, is known as a etho hopper clock or a hopper timer. He was the one who came up with the design, and it's the easiest way to time longer amounts of extended signal. It's basically a good way to time. So you want to place a piston facing down here with a block on, and then you want to come down 2 blocks like so, and place a redstone torch on top of that. Then now going into this torch we want to place a repeater, if I could grab one, a repeater like so. On this block right here we want to place a redstone dust, then a block above the repeater facing the other way on 2 tick, and then a block above this one. What this is gonna do, I'll put a lamp down because lamps are awesome. Do like so. What this is gonna do is that whenever we have power from this circuit, which is a timing circuit, this piston is gonna be extended, and this clock is gonna cycle. And the way this redstone clock works is that 2 items in here will accumulate to 2 pulses. 3 items means that it's gonna do 3 pulses. and you guessed it, 4 means that it's gonna do 4 pulses, and so on all the way up to whatever point you desire. And I call this the configurable double pulser. I made a Planet Minecraft post about it many years ago, and you should hopefully, if you followed along and you played along with the Redstone, know why this works. It's a bit complicated, I'll give you that, but we are going to start moving into more complicated stuff, and I think in the next tutorial I will start to talk about circuits instead of what all the blocks do. I feel like you pretty much now have heard anything you need to know about blocks. So thank you ever so much for watching, and please do let me know what you thought of this, and come ask me any question you want, and don't forget to like and subscribe. See you guys.